Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. marycariola.org.
From WXXI News, I'm Jasmine Singer, and this is Environmental Connections. Today's Environmental Connection began last fall when I noticed something unexpected taking over a tree stump at the edge of my yard. It was bright golden caps blooming in layers, like a ruffled collar, you could say. So I snapped a photo, I texted a friend, and I got an answer back almost immediately. Golden oyster mushrooms, edible, invasive, beautiful, complicated. So that last word really stuck with me because fungi are complicated. They're often misunderstood, deeply underappreciated, and quietly powerful. And it turns out they may also be essential to helping to solve the climate crisis. No big deal. Fungi help store carbon. They clean polluted land and water. They're being turned into meat and leather and even plastic alternatives. But as climate change and habitat loss threaten their survival, we risk losing these vital allies before we even fully understand them. So today we're exploring fungi and the future. What role can mushrooms and mycelium play in fighting climate change? And what's at stake if we don't protect them? Joining me today are three guests bringing their science, their entrepreneurship, and their wild foraging wisdom to the discussion. So joining us remotely, we have Aishwarya Veerabahu, a fungal ecologist and PhD student in the Pringle Lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Welcome, Aishwarya.
Hi, it's so nice to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
We know you're very busy, and we're grateful that you are spending this hour with us. Also joining us remotely is Kimberly Lay, CEO and co-founder of Prime Roots, a company using Koji mycelium to create sustainable alt protein. Welcome, Kimberly.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. I'm super excited about picking your brain. And joining me in person here in the studio is Stacy Estabrook, a wild mushroom forager and founder of FLX Mushrooms in Ithaca. Welcome, Stacy. Thanks for making the drive.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
And with that, let's dig in. Aishwarya, I want to start with you. First of all, I want to clarify, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, Aishwarya, you're exactly right.
It's a beautiful name. I want to start with the big picture because you've said that if there were no fungi in the soil, there might not be life on Earth. And I know this is a big question, but can you give us the quick version of what fungi are and why they're so essential, especially in the context of climate change?
Yeah, fungi are one of the first organisms that came onto land, right? So it's still being studied, but there is a lot of evidence that suggests that fungi might have helped plants come onto land and colonize this rock and turn it into soil. And so much of the ground, whether it's soil that we recognize or sand or other types of like substrate on the ground, fungi tend to occupy them along with bacteria and other microorganisms. And so definitely a huge part of it that I alluded to earlier is helping plants and forests. So some fungi are mycorrhizal, which means that they partner with plants and help them gain nutrients from the soil like nitrogen or phosphorus. And so fungi are part of a plant's healthy biology, pretty much. And a huge percentage of plants on Earth partner with fungi like this. And so I think it's a really important part of keeping plants healthy. Fungi are an important part of keeping plants healthy, and plants do the main job of capturing carbon from the atmosphere and then photosynthesizing and turning it into biomass.
How do pollution and land use change threaten those fungal networks?
Well, I'll start with land use change. When ecosystems are degraded and their habitats are raised down, whether it's for agriculture or forestry or anything like that, it completely changes the nature of the plants and also the health of the soil, right? It just it might increase the sunlight hitting that spot and therefore reduce the moisture of the soil, and that completely changes the soil conditions that the fungi might find optimal. And so that can really heavily change and decrease the fungal biodiversity that you would find there. And then remind me, what was the first one you asked about?
Yeah, so the pollution and land use, you touched on land use change. What about pollution? How does that threaten the fungal networks?
Yeah, pollution is going to be pretty much the same thing, right? Like when there are pollutants, especially if it's like chemical pollutants that somehow can get into a fungal body or otherwise threatens their habitat, it's going to kind of become a less optimal or like poisonous conditions for them to exist in.
So last question for you for now in this sort of like 101 before we touch base with our other guests. What would you say that we still don't understand about the fungal kingdom other than how to pronounce fungi?
No, it's okay. There are so many different ways of pronouncing fungi, fungi, fungi or fungi. So all of them are great. There are tons of things we still don't know about them, right? We still don't even fully understand how they partner with plants, right? Sometimes we're assuming that fungi are almost this like benevolent helper that is helping plants, and so we're assuming that relationship is a mutualism where both of them mutually benefit, but that might not always be the case. Fungi could be parasitic on plants, and we don't even understand the true breadth of their biodiversity. So only like about 10% of fungi have even been discovered and described. And so
Wow.
that's a huge void in our understanding of them. And we also don't understand always like the products that they create, the secondary metabolites that can be helpful into like turning into like FDA drugs down the line, right? So we don't even know and understand their full like chemical biodiversity either.
Fascinating. Okay, I have many more questions, so hang out for just a minute. I want to chat with Kimberly. Kimberly, your work focuses on a very different application of fungi, turning them into food. Now, most of us love some fried mushrooms from time to time, but what led you to see mycelium as a hugely important answer to both nutrition and sustainability?
That's a great question. So mycelium is a lot denser than the mushrooms that we're, commonly seeing in the stores and using at home on an everyday basis. So when you think of mycelium, the way we like to explain it to, the average consumer is it's similar to like the roots of mushrooms. So you get a lot more density. You also get a lot more potential nutrition. So depending on the mycelium used, we use koji primarily. There's a lot of protein that's actually within the mycelium itself. And so it's raw. I like to describe it similar to like chicken breast, where it has these like really beautiful fibers that's very meat-like. And part of actually what inspired me to start Prime Roots was really identifying that mycelium under a microscope is actually the same size and texture as meat muscle fibers. And so instead of creating a alternative to meat that's using really processed soy or wheat or these plant sources that are really processed, you can actually use fungi and mycelium in the natural form factor that it likes to grow in already to make these really meat-like textures, but also have a protein source that's really bioavailable and that makes delicious tasting foods that we all know and love. So we specifically focus on deli meats at Prime Roots, which carry a lot of baggage just in the conventional world. We get to do it without using the nitrates, preservatives, all the not so great stuff that you find in deli meats.
And our regular listeners to Environmental Connections know that I've been vegan for more than 20 years. And I'm fascinated by how plant-based food has been evolving, because clearly we've got this huge uptick in plant-based burgers like Impossible and Beyond. I myself tend toward those more whole foods-based items, though I certainly see a place for the Impossible Burger. And Prime Roots, I think, is really touching on something that's going to be very big, especially especially, and in many ways it already is, but especially when you think about what Aishwarya was talking about before, how we just haven't even tapped into understanding the full potential of mushrooms yet. And that goes for how we can eat them, which I'm also going to be talking to Stacey about in a moment. But Kimberly, let's talk about that environmental impact. Prime Roots claims up to 91% less land use than traditional meat. So how is that achieved? And is this per calorie?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we did a full life cycle analysis of our process with a third party. Came in and really looked at, all of the processes that we do to make our meats. And what we found is that, if you think about the concept of alternative proteins and why it is a more sustainable option, you're not having to feed an animal a ton of calories for it to expend on just growing. You can actually use the calories much more directly. So for a calorie of beef, like meat that you eat on your plate, it takes about 30 calories of feed for that cow. When you're talking about fungi, you're getting much closer to a 1-to-1 conversion, meaning 1 calorie of feed or sugar to convert into a calorie of protein. So it's a much more efficient way to get protein, and it really just stems from the fact that they're more efficient. And the name Prime Roots actually comes from the fact that animals are derived. We are descendant of the fungi kingdom, and so it's that's a little bit of the nerdy play on the name, but it's also a really high quality source of protein. So similar to the roots of mushrooms.
Oh, I love the name, and I didn't know that. So what do you say, Kimberly, to skeptics who are hesitant about or maybe even frightened of fungi-based foods?
So koji and the mycelium that we use is not a mushroom. So it doesn't taste like mushrooms at all. It's really meat-like. And a lot of like the most famous chefs in the world use mycelium to make meats actually meatier. And so if someone doesn't like mushrooms or fungi, should give Prime Roots a try because it actually just tastes like meat. And we've actually done a test recently with a blind taste test with consumers, and over 50% of meat eaters compared to meat actually would switch to Prime Roots. So it's gotten to a point where even mushroom skeptics or meat lovers can get behind the concept because it is a healthier and more sustainable option.
Well, I'm getting hungry. It is about lunchtime, so hopefully there will be some mushrooms in my lunch later today. For those of you just tuning in, I'm Jasmine Singer, and this is Environmental Connections on WXXI. Today we're talking about fungi and the climate and how mushrooms can help us heal the planet and why we need to pay closer attention to them. I'm joined by Aishwarya Veerabahu, who's a fungal ecologist at UW-Madison, Kimberly Lay, who you just heard from, the co-founder and CEO of Prime Roots, and Stacey Estabrook, a wild mushroom forager and founder of FLX Mushrooms in Ithaca. Stacey, thanks for being so patient. Your work is rooted in, quite literally, I suppose, in the local woods. So what have you observed over the years in terms of how climate change is affecting wild fungi in the region?
Thanks for your question. Well, I have been keeping a journal for many years, my Myco journal, to tell me. I write down what the weather is like and when I'm finding things and where I'm finding things and how much of something I'm finding on any given year. It's like a little treasure map that I make for myself so I can come back year after year. And I have noticed that the mushroom seasons are a little bit less predictable than they had been in decades prior. I used to be able to almost within a week or two look at the calendar and go, okay, it's time to go out and find this thing, assuming there's rain. And now we've been having, just like we've been experiencing recently, earlier springs, earlier temperature rising, followed by cold spells. That pattern seems to be emerging. And so the patterns in which not just mushrooms, but all of nature is changing alongside of that.
Yeah, it's so true. And I'm wondering, does this have anything to do with the mushroom at the back of my yard that popped up, I swear, overnight? Like, why do how does that happen? How do they pop up overnight?
Well, they're getting all of their cues from Mother Nature. Some mushrooms are not very picky about when or even where they pop up. If it's a good rain, they'll come up whenever it's in this temperature range, which could be kind of wide. Where other mushrooms like a morel will only come up at a very specific time of year when the temperatures are at this at their right levels, and that's also accompanied by rain. So there's a lot of factors in a very small window. If the environmental conditions are not correct for the mushroom at that time, it just takes a nap. It sort of hibernates until the next year, and then it will come back this year. So they will skip a year sometimes if the weather's not right.
Have you considered publishing that book, your diary? I mean, I would read that. I would get that for everyone for Hanukkah.
I've had people offer me money just to look at it for 5 minutes.
Yeah, you're on
They're like,
something.
can I just look in it, just see what's in here?
Well, I'm one of those people. Put me in the line. So mushrooms, Stacy, mushrooms are one of the few foods that people take from the wild.
Yeah.
How do your classes balance appreciation with sustainable foraging?
I think the appreciation kind of, in a way, needs to be cultivated before you really understand how to be sustainable. If you are out in the woods and you're looking for mushrooms, you have to be aware of your environment and not just looking for this one specific thing. You're looking for certain types of trees that might be around that this mushroom you're seeking likes to grow in. And also being aware of not trampling over other possibly endangered or protected plants while you're on your way to get your treasure.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things to balance here. And I think one thing I kind of hit on with Kimberly a moment ago, which is fear, because people are justifiably, I think, pretty frightened of being poisoned by mushrooms. What is the real danger, and how much do you have to know to avoid dying?
Right, that's a good question. That's the question. Well, we have over 400 species of mushrooms that grow in New York State.
Wow.
And out of those, there are a certain amount that are edible, that are something you would want to eat. Some are more on that survival food level where you could eat it to sustain yourself if you had to, but no one's actively seeking these mushrooms out. And then you have mushrooms that contain toxins. Out of all of those mushrooms that we have, there really is a relatively small percentage of them that have toxins in them that would make you ill.
Wow, okay.
So I think there's a little bit of microphobia in the United States that might not be so prominent in Eastern European countries, where mushroom hunting is just taught through generations. And of course, indigenous cultures, it's a very important part of life and would not have been taught in a way that's caused the fear.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I would be the person that picked the poisonous one and like on my first foraging experience, but maybe I'll go to one of your classes.
Well, if this helps you feel any better,
Yeah.
you cannot be harmed by touching a mushroom.
Okay.
In order for the toxin to get into your body, you need to ingest it into your system. So simply observing something, picking it up and looking at it from its different angles, you will not be harmed by
Okay.
that.
Well, that does make me feel a little bit better. Thank you. And for those of you just tuning in, you're listening to Environmental Connections. And if you have a question for any of our guests, you can call us. Tell us what you think about mushrooms, what your thoughts are, what your experience is. 844-295-TALK. That's 844-295-8255. The local number is 585-263-9994. Or you can email us at connections@wxxi.org or comment on the Connections live stream on the WXXI News YouTube channel. And thank you for those of you who are tuning in on YouTube. We have an email from Michael. Michael says, my love affair affair with mushrooms began when a family friend invited us to his Italian restaurant where he grilled mushrooms for us. My preference for a burger is a grilled portobello. I love your episodes of the show. Thanks, Michael. We love your email. And we're going to take a quick break with that. But when we come back, we'll dig into fungi as tools of regeneration. From cleaning up toxic waste to replacing plastic, mushrooms are doing far more than most of us realize. You're listening to Environmental Connections from WXXI News. Stay with us.
Supporting your favorite programs on WXXI TV and radio is just a click away when you go public at WXXI.org. It's a convenient and secure way of supporting an important community resource. WXXI.org. Go public and pledge your support today.
Welcome back to Environmental Connections. I'm Jasmine Singer. If you're just joining us, today we're exploring the surprising role that fungi can play in the fight against climate change and so much more, from storing carbon underground to cleaning up pollution, even replacing plastics and meat. Mushrooms are emerging as powerful, if underappreciated, I would say, climate allies. With me are Aishwarya Veerabahu, a fungal ecologist and PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Kimberly Lay, who is the CEO and co-founder of the fungi-based food company Prime Roots, and in the studio with me is Stacy Estabrook, a certified wild mushroom forager and founder of FLX Mushrooms in Ithaca. Aishwarya, I want to turn back to you. Let's talk about, I'm so afraid of mispronouncing this, but you'll correct me. Let's talk about mycormediation, the process of using fungi to clean up environmental pollutants. So did I pronounce it right? How does it work? And what kinds of contaminants are we talking about?
Yeah, so it's pronounced mycoremediation, right? That prefix myco is always going to refer to anything fungal. And so, yeah, there are some fungi that can do incredible things like sequestering and absorbing pollutants that are out in nature. The kind of tough thing is that there's still emerging research on it, and it hasn't totally been taken up to scale, but I think that there is definitely a lot of potential for it. I'm on the board of an organization called Co-Renewal that has a history of doing projects exactly like this. And so one of their first projects was in a region of the Amazon rainforest where there was an oil spill, and they tried to use fungi to absorb and break down some of those oil compounds. And the reason why they can do that is because fungi have enzymes that can break down, really it's the components of wood. That's what it first evolved for. And so these enzymes that can break down long chains of carbon molecules, those carbon molecules can sometimes also be found in oil. And so they kind of have those tools, those enzymes and proteins, to be able to break down the pollutants that you can find in oil spills. And other times they can just absorb up heavy metals within them and just keep them inside their bodies, so that those heavy metals that might be toxic to plants aren't continuing to be in the soil and move around in the soil. And so one of our more recent projects that's still ongoing, or really we're wrapping it up, is a project where we've tried to put fungi in these kind of little wattles, is kind of a word for it. They look like sandbags. We put them in areas that have been severely burned. As you know, the West Coast is experiencing more frequent and more intense fires. And so when human structures get burned, like houses and other types of buildings, the materials we use in the construction of those buildings, sometimes they can have heavy metals in them that when they get burned by an intense fire, they can get down into the soil. And so I'm really excited to see the results of that project.
That's fascinating. Did you have something to add to that? No, we're both fascinated here in the studio. What is the biggest barrier to scaling mycoremediation efforts?
I think it's really probably just growing up the mycelium, which I think Kimberly would know more about. It seems like there's a lot of incredible companies and biotechnology working on trying to scale up the mycelium so that it could become the size of, say, like a wall, right? To where you could put an entire barrier of a fungal block or mycelial block in a place so that when water flows through it or when soil is encountering it, there is a greater surface area for the fungi to absorb and help sequester those chemicals or pollutants.
Kimberly, let's turn to you. You might have something to add about that barrier to scaling mycoremediation efforts. I'm going to get this right. But I also want to talk about your work being, as Aishwarya kind of alluded to, it's a part of a much larger conversation about alternative proteins. What do you think that the future holds for mycofoods in the context of food security and climate resilience?
I think it's definitely part of the solution. So I think there's a lot of talks about different technologies in alternative proteins. There's plant-based, cell-based, fungi-based. I think all of the solutions need to exist. Like they all have their pros and their cons. With fungi-based proteins, I started Prime Roots in 2017, and we've only been on the market for the last 2 years or so. And so it did take a good, 5+ years of development to we get the products to market. And so it's been a lot of development, and we're still such early days of really discovering what applications fungi can be used for. And so I think that in terms of food security and just overall food access for countries and people of all different walks of life and places, I think it holds a lot of solutions because of how efficient it is. And we were talking earlier about the sustainability. You can take much fewer inputs to make high quality sources of protein for people all over the world. So that's something that I'm very personally passionate about. We're tackling our plates at home and our sandwiches first, but our aspirations are very global because we do have a really powerful technology that's inspired and really building off of nature and what has made us, a species, and we would not be here without fungi. And so we're really going back to our roots to discover all these great ways of leveraging nature. So we call it technology, but it is actually very, very old.
That is such a great way of framing it. And going back to what I just asked Aishwarya, what is the biggest barrier from your vantage point to scaling this?
So we work within the confines of traditional industries. And so there's a lot of dynamics that I think consumers don't realize exist in terms of how to get new products to market, or in our case, like new foods to people's plates. And so we've actually found a lot of great, allies and partners along the way, but we are doing something that is creating a new category of products, and we're disrupting a age-old industry with a product that is healthier, that is better, and there tends to be a lot of, I'd say, not necessarily pushback, but some skepticism or scaredness, fearfulness from traditional industries because what we're doing is so new and potentially disruptive. And what I like to say to that is, we're all trying to do the same thing as a food industry, which is give people healthier sources of foods, meet people where they are, and also deliver an experience that people know and love already. Deli meats are the most consumed food in America, but they're full with nitrates and preservatives and things that are literally killing people and our kids. Like nitrates are a class 1 carcinogen, according to the World Health Organization. People are waking up to this, but there's also not a great way to deal with it from the conventional meat side. So we've actually reinvented it in a way where we can do away with all the bad stuff. And so that's really disruptive. So we've just found that it has been um, actually more challenging to navigate the industry than it has been consumers. Like we are met with really, really open arms from consumers who have left the deli, who are at the delis, who are looking for healthier options. And so, yeah, it's I think the challenges of any new company breaking into a really, really old space.
Mm. And I just shout out for those of you listening in the Rochester area. Here in Rochester, we have Grass Fed Butcher, which is a vegan deli, and it makes its vegan deli meat here in Rochester. So you could go there and try out some of the alternatives we're talking about. Kimberly, is there a risk of commodifying fungi in ways that harm ecosystems?
I guess I don't want to say no because there's always a potential to, I mean, too much of anything is bad. I think it's making sure that missions, organizations, companies, or nonprofits, or whoever's, tackling the production of fungi are doing it in a sustainable way and thinking about what is the impact 10, 20, 50 years, 100 years into the future. But as of right now, I think we're so early in getting people aware that fungi is even a potential solution to a lot of our biggest problems from, plastic, food, etc. I don't think that today it's a concern, but I do think that responsible stewardship is very important.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an important point. And Stacy, I'm sure you also want to weigh in on that. I'm wondering, Stacy, if you think that the general public might be starting to shift in how they view fungi, or are mushrooms still relegated to a punchline or an afterthought? What do you think?
They have definitely been gaining in popularity over the last, over the last 10 years. And each year seems to be picking up a little bit more speed. You even see mushrooms, mushroom items of T-shirts and bags and toys. It's part of it's on our minds these days.
Yeah.
But most people don't really feel confident enough to be able to go out and harvest something and bring it back for their table and their family. It takes a little bit of education. You don't need to learn every mushroom that there is. I don't know every mushroom that there is, and that's okay. If you have sort of a pared down list of things that are easy to identify, reliably found, and have no potentially dangerous lookalikes, you've kind of got a list of safe mushrooms, and that's a really good way to approach learning about them and building that confidence to go out and actually harvest them and bring them back. Part of that can be done through traditional ways. There's wonderful technical field guide, but they are, again, technical. And if it's the first time you're trying to learn about mushrooms, that can be a bit intimidating. So I like the opportunity to teach people face-to-face in my classes, and also taking people out into the woods to do forays, to do foraging, and seeing it and smelling it and picking it up is different than reading about it in a book.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you how you work with people to help build a relationship with fungi that's respectful and curious rather than extractive. And it sounds like it's just experiential. Is that what you would say?
It is. A lot of mushroom hunting is not just being able to identify the mushroom itself. You need a lot of understanding of what environment you're in and your timing and all of that. So through gaining that understanding, you're really broadening the way that you experience being in nature itself. And finding mushrooms, no matter how many times I've found mushrooms, it is the most exciting thing. Every time it's the most exciting thing I've ever done. And I understand that it's really easy to just want to rush out. You see this treasure in front of you and you want to just rush out and pick all of them.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah. You must be so excited when you come across one that you don't know what it is.
Always. There's so many little tiny mushrooms that I don't know what they are. If they're not edible, medicinal, or potentially dangerous, they're the ones I learned first. But there's 400, so I'm always stumbling across some tiny little thing that I have to go, I wonder who you are.
This is the first episode of Environmental Connections that I have been smiling the entire episode, by the way. You should see the chat that's going on with my producers over here. Like, there's so much information about mushrooms happening. What are some of your favorite local species, and are any of them in danger?
Yeah, I teach my top 10 mushrooms. These are chicken of the woods, our oyster mushrooms, our chanterelles. We have wonderful lobster mushrooms in our area, and morels, of course. These are mushrooms that you have probably seen if you've spent any time in the woods and wondered what they are. Can I eat this? They are mushrooms that you will encounter, and once you get used to seeing them and you have an idea of what it is that you are looking at, it's pretty hard to misidentify this group of mushrooms, which is why I chose to teach them.
Yeah.
There's only some of them only have one, they only look like this. There is no other mushroom that looks like this. And then you have some mushrooms that have quite a few lookalikes. Starting with mushrooms that don't really have lookalikes is a really good place to start and build up your confidence and experience.
Yeah, the first time I tried the chicken of the woods, I was like flabbergasted. It was so meaty in the way it tasted. I mean, it really was kind of like a meat and potatoes experience with the stir fry that I didn't make it. I can't cook, but someone made it for me. What's your favorite mushroom dish, by the way?
People ask me what my favorite mushroom is, and I say it's like telling you which of my children are the favorite.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. It's if I had to choose, I would say maitake, which is hen of the woods. It's a fall mushroom. They tend to be rather large, and they're aromatic and incredibly versatile in their cooking. Up until recently, I had never seen cultivated ones in a grocery store before. I did actually buy a little from Wegmans. They had maitake. I said, let's try it. And it cultivated is maybe slightly different, but it's a good way to get a taste for mushrooms other than the ones that you're used to having. Try something new. That they're out there in the stores now, which is wonderful.
Yeah, I'll try that next time I go to Wegmans, and just to bring in the last hour of Environmental Connections, I'll plug in my car at the charging station there and get my mushrooms. We have a comment from a YouTube viewer. Chris Cooper says, I want to connect with other mycophiles. Am I saying that right? Mycophiles? Okay, great. Are there any groups or communities in the Rochester area? I know you're from Ithaca, but do you happen to know the answer to that?
Rochester is the Rochester Area Mycological Association, so it's RAMA. And it is actually one of the bigger and more active groups in our general region.
Looks like it was founded in 1984. And I'm getting this information from the folks in the booth who are very excited that this group has existed for so long.
They take groups meet on different locations and go out foraging together.
And they have a very active Facebook group, it looks like. So,
they
Chris,
do.
if you're watching, thank you for the question, and you can head on over to their Facebook group. And we have an email from Alex. Alex says, it seems like fast food could be one of the easiest use cases for supplementing or replacing with mycoprotein. I know I'm not getting ground beef from Taco Bell. No cow should die to be made into a Big Mac, says Alex. Just make it something nominally better that my doctor won't yell at me for eating, like an Impossible Burger. That's true. Yeah, Kimberly, you might have some thoughts on that as well. Like the Impossible Burger, the Beyond Burger, that whole kind of trend of food. It's. I think it definitely has a wonderful place in the world, but certainly not in your optimally healthy category, one would probably argue. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of folks who've gone after the burger, the nuggets, a lot of these like very processed foods that we just don't eat every day. Sandwiches are the most consumed food in America. Almost as many sandwiches are eaten every day as cups of coffee are consumed. About, I think that's 400 million. And so there's a lot of sandwiches being consumed, and they're just not great for you, which is our occasion. So yes, I think, the fast food angle is a great place for plant-based because I believe 92% of consumers are now looking for healthier options, and very aware that we should be thinking about the foods that we're putting in our bodies.
Though I have a friend who, when Burger King started carrying the Impossible Burger, I have a friend who went through the drive-through and got it and sat in the parking lot and cried with joy because it was like just such a culture shift moment that so many of the fast food restaurants are starting to go there. Kimberly, what's one thing you wish more people understood about fungi?
That's a really interesting question. I think probably there's a lot of diversity within fungi, and so they're not all mushrooms. We love mushrooms. I personally love mushrooms. I also forage for them here in California. And so nothing wrong with mushrooms, but I think a lot of people have an aversion to mushrooms or just this preconceived notion about what they are. And so I would really encourage folks to learn that there's so much more within the fungi kingdom. And there's probably something out there that you will like.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just learn one thing about it. I sort of think like post-human, there will be roaches and rats, pigeons and mushrooms. That's just my non-scientific perspective. Speaking of science, let's go to Aishwarya, an actual scientist. Aishwarya, what gives you hope about the role of mushrooms in our climate future?
Um, I think really just the fact that they can evolve kind of on a faster time scale than plants or animals can, right? So when we kind of think of a fungus that grows on strawberries, we notice that it grows pretty quickly, right? And then it might start producing that fuzziness, which is its sexual structures. And so it gets there really quick, right? It's a lot different than animals that might take a few years to like, right, hit puberty or become sexually mature. And so I think there is some hope there that they can evolve and adapt pretty quickly. But I just also want to say that I am scared for them too, you know. It's not all hope and beams of sunshine over here. They are really vulnerable organisms, just like plants, animals, and we are. And so I am concerned. I think that fungi and every organism out there has a role in adapting and working together to try and build resilience. And the more we try and keep habitats intact and and the way that they evolved, like rainforests, right, like not touching them and not raising them down to like grow soy farms for animal agriculture, which by the way I have also been vegan for a number of years, so
Hmm.
I really excited that I'm in good company here.
Totally, me too.
The Yeah, the more we keep those habitats intact, the more they have a chance to build that resilience and adapt to a changing climate.
What would you say if there's like a particular species of fungus that you think deserves more attention scientifically or culturally? What would you say it is?
Oh my gosh,
Putting you
that
on the
is
spot. Totally putting you on the spot.
I know it's a lot like that question of asking which is my favorite kid.
Right.
I guess I'm going to have to say, not even going to pick just one fungus. I'm going to pick an entire kind of group of fungi. I think the Ascomycetes are really really cool. So this includes morels and the little elf cup fungi, if you've seen those. Yeah, they are just a really cool group of organisms, and many of them produce mushrooms, and they just have really cool chemistry going on there. And a lot of them when I have worked in like post-fire burned ecosystems, they're some of the first ones that come up after a fire. And so I think that they have some really cool potential. I think they should be studied more. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to ask you one more very difficult question because it's still the morning where you are, and hopefully you've had your caffeine. If you had unlimited funding to advance one fungi-based solution to climate change, where would you put it? She's like, I'm never coming on the show again.
I know, that's kind of terrifying. I think I would put it towards drought resistance and researching how to improve drought resistance in fungi, right? Like if I could magically splice a set of genes or just basically put research into how more fungi might become drought resistant. I think that is one of the huge things that climate change is going to usher in, is increased periods of drought and increased intensity of drought across the world. And that makes me nervous because I think a lot of us intrinsically associate fungi with rain, right? Like here in Wisconsin, as soon as like spring starts, every time it rains, regardless of whether I had to bike home in it, I'm like, yes, that means my buddies are going to be coming up out of the soil soon. And yeah, it just kind of devastates me to think about a world in which they go through longer periods of not experiencing rain. Like I would want them to try and be able to make it through that. But I also have to insert that. So I research invasive golden oyster mushrooms, and so I kind of love the way that you started this show. And there is a real risk that invasive fungi pose to native fungi, right? So when we're talking about foraging and wondering if climate change is going to affect them, I'm about to publish my first paper where I show that golden oyster mushrooms are outcompeting and disrupting native fungal communities. And so the dead wood environments that golden oysters start to colonize, they experience lowered fungal diversity. And it's kind of a really shocking and an awful thing to see. And another part of my publication, I explore how with the predicted climate, so like NASA has predictions of how the climate might change in the next 20 and 50 years. I created a species distribution model based on those predicted climate data.
Wow.
And it shows that golden oysters have a lot more area in North America that they might spread to with the predictions of climate change. And so that means more potential habitat that they could establish. And that also means more potential fungal biodiversity that they could outcompete and disrupt.
I want to read your paper. That sounds
Thank you.
so interesting. I love that this is what you're studying too. I was studying theater and like just, rolling around in a room wearing all black and smoking clove cigarettes, and you're actually doing important things. You're nodding, Stacy. You're nodding a lot to what Aishwarya is talking about. I assume that this is resonating with you. Do you think that fungi have been left out of the environmental movement? And if so, why? Like, do you feel like this is just a piece of the conversation that we need to be having more of?
Well, fungi are an important part of the whole environmental conversation. I think a bigger part than we really give it credit. And there are so many different aspects in regards to how fungi connect and influence and are responsive to the environment itself. And it is wonderful as it is to go out and forage. I recognize that it takes education, it takes the time, and not if all of us are out foraging, well, we're going to damage the ecosystem and there'll be less mushrooms. And I just wanted to offer that kind of a mid ground for people, or even more of a beginning ground until you are comfortable foraging, is to grow some mushrooms yourself.
That's terrifying to me, just to be honest.
Another thing I teach is mushroom cultivation.
Okay.
We grow mushrooms on logs. You inoculate them with the mycelium, and it takes over the log just like it would a standing or falling tree.
Okay.
And you can forage in your own backyard, and you know exactly what mushroom that is because you put it there.
You know what? You're selling me on it. We have an email from Jillian, and I think this one's going to be for you, Stacy. Chicken of the woods is so pretty. That said, I'm not especially interested in foraging, but she says would love to grow some. That's what you were just talking about. And she says, can I find people who teach that? Well, it seems that you just did, Jillian.
You did indeed. You can do cultivated chicken of the woods. It's one that it takes extra steps, and it's a bit more difficult. You need to sterilize the wood before you inoculate it, where usually you're just drilling holes in the log, putting in the spawn in the holes, and you cover it up with some wax. Very easy. Then you sit back and wait. With the chicken of the woods, it's a little bit more difficult to cultivate, but it can be done. Mycorrhizal mushrooms, ones that grow in conjunction with certain plants or trees, they need to be in the presence of those. They'll be in the ground alongside the tree's roots. Those aren't very easy to cultivate, but mushrooms that grow on trees generally are.
And how can people get involved with your efforts?
You can visit my website at FLX Mushrooms. Hear a description of the classes and workshops, how to contact me if you want to go out in the woods and do some foraging.
Well, I love it. It's just so exciting. I did have more questions. I'm very excited about all that we're talking about today. You all lifted me up so much. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. So my huge thanks to Aishwarya Veerabahu, Kimberly Lay, and Stacy Estabrook for helping us to explore the complex and surprising and very inspiring world of fungi or fungi or however you want to say it. Until next time, I'm Jasmine Singer. Thanks for making today's Environmental Connections.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.